Are we good? Hey. Welcome. Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing the last morning of 20 Books? Don't stay out too late tonight because we have the rave event tomorrow with the book sales and whatnot. I learned that lesson last year. Don't stay out late, okay? Be here, be square. All right, so those of you I've not met, my name is Kevin Ikenberry. I'm a military science fiction and alternate history writer, and I will tell you that I am not one of those people you will meet here at the conference that ever said they wanted to be a writer at the age of like 5 or 6. I was told in high school and again in college I was a good writer, and I did zero with it. And then one day I was on active duty with the Army. This was 2009. It was an idle Tuesday afternoon about 4:30, and I had this character start talking to me. And because, oh, by the way, my name is Kevin and I have a notebook problem, I grabbed a notebook and started writing notes, and I recognized pretty quickly that this was a book. How in the hell do I write a book? So I decided that I was going to just kind of go through this and start this writing process, and I would never have dreamed now, roughly 13 years later, to have 20 books in print, including a traditionally published book. So I'm just proof positive that some of the things that I'm going to be sharing with you today, and I'll tell you the story of why I'm going to do that here in just a second, but this stuff does work. So this class is called All About Character. This is typically the first third of a class that I give on story structure. Those of you that are pantsers, don't worry, turn off your spider sense that's tingling right now. I'm not going to teach you story structure today, okay? If you really want me to, I'll do that later, okay? But standard disclaimer, all right? So everything that I'm going to cover with you is just like any other writing class in the world. Your mileage may vary, okay? Take what works for you, take what resonates for you. If something doesn't, move on. There's a million different references on writing. I'm not going to tell you that everything that I'm going to tell you is the gospel about this. There's a lot of great resources out there about character development, but I want you to have an open mind about this. Now, before everybody starts taking pictures of my slides, take a picture of this one. At the end of the presentation, text this number, and I will send you a copy of these slides. If you're outside the United States, you can send me a direct email or a direct message through the Facebook page, and I'd be more than happy to get your email address and send these slides to you. So, and when you do this, you also get my notes on the slides, so it's not going to just give you the slides that are blank. I'm sorry? The Evite does not have the notes, though. So the notes pages that that are actually referenced that I'll be talking through are actually on this presentation. Okay, so every time I give a presentation, I like to give credit where credit is due. So one of the most important things that I did early in my career was I reached out to a mentor. And I had met Lou Anders at a writing conference in Colorado back in 2002. And I had decided after writing my first book, that first idea that came to me at the idle Tuesday afternoon, that I wanted to do things differently, because that first book took me about 18 months to write. It was a terrible mess. Don't need to do that again. It was a terrible mess, and I just decided I was going to do this differently. I wanted to learn how to outline. I needed to learn what the structure was. And I had met Lou, and we had talked about some things, and I was having foot surgery, so I was literally going to be on my butt for about 6 weeks. And I decided that I was going to outline this next project, and I'd never done this before. And so a couple days after my surgery, I'm propped up on the couch, got my laptop, open it up, turn on Microsoft Word, change it over to outline mode because I'm cool, I'm going to do an outline. And I sat there watching the blinking cursor of doom for about 2 minutes. And I chickened out. I happened to go to Facebook, and Lou had just posted an interview that he had done with a podcast talking about story structure. So I went and listened to that podcast, and long story short, as soon as it was done, I wrote a 12-page outline in 3.5 hours. But I realized something was wrong with it. And I went back to another podcast Lou had done on a different story structure, and I did the same thing. And at that point, I recognized it would be really great if these two story structures and these two methodologies could actually kind of meet in the middle. About the same time Lou posts on his Facebook page, he wishes those story structures could have a love child. I reached out, said, hey, remember me? I'm trying to do this. I don't know what I'm going to do. Can you give me some tips on this? And I fully expected a one response email. I got 6 weeks, daily emails. And what I learned from Lou Anders is what I'm going to teach you today. So, a couple of references. You'll hear me talk a lot about the book, My Story Can Beat Up Your Story. This book changed my life. It's a screenwriting book. And it definitely talks a lot about the character development stuff that we're going to talk about today, as well as story structure. The other book up there is the one that I was asked to write about all the things that I teach. I'm not going to sell it to you, but if you want it, I do have a book on this stuff. So definitely check out My Story Can Beat Up Your Story. Okay, let's talk characters. How many characters should we have in a book? Good, nobody answered. Awesome. No, it's not 0. We have to have the characters that tell the story, right? So most of the time you'll see we have a protagonist, okay, the hero or the heroine of the story. We often have an antagonist. Hopefully you caught my antagonist class yesterday. If you didn't, it's available through the streaming and it'll be online shortly. That's a little bit more of a graduate level class of what we're going to talk about today. But then we might also have a relationship character or a dynamic or a stakes character. Notice I've got all those on the same line. Everybody heard those terms before, relationship or dynamic or stakes? They're all the same. One of my pet peeves with all the story structure references and everything that you see out there are different names for the same thing. Okay, that's one of the things that I've always tried to clear up when I teach classes. So we talk about the relationship character, the dynamic character, the stakes character. They're all the same thing. Now there's other types of characters too. Your side characters all fill different roles. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about all of these folks today. Now, you'll notice the note on the bottom that says the use of a relationship character is not required. Okay, we have plenty of stories that are out there that are protagonist versus antagonist, like man versus nature, those types of things. I don't necessarily have to have this relationship character to show the growth of my hero. But if you use it, it really works well in conveying the theme and, again, that character growth for your protagonist. Okay, let's talk the 5 questions. And again, don't try to scribble and write all these down. I'm going to spend time on each of these questions. Okay? Every time I sit down to write a manuscript, this is the first thing I do. Who is my hero? What are they trying to accomplish? Who's with them on the journey? Who's standing in their way? Who's trying to stop them? And finally, what happens if my hero fails? Sounds pretty simple, right? The challenge is here, you can go very deep or very shallow with your answers. What you end up doing, though, is really mapping out where your characters start, where you want them to end, and then the challenge is for you, the writer, to get them there. Okay, let's talk about how we do that. All right, so first question, the protagonist. Who is your hero? The most obvious answer we often hear all the time is a sympathetic character. Okay, we want someone that the audience immediately sympathizes with. The most common trope you see with this is the orphan. I bet right now all of you could probably name 5 famous orphans from literary, from books, from movies, from comic books, television. It's a common theme, right? Superman, Batman, Spider-Man. I'm on a comic book mode this morning, okay? Hollywood actually considers an orphan to have only lost one parent. So then someone like Katniss Everdeen comes on board, okay? So we have orphans that are a common trope for a sympathetic character, okay? Harry Potter. Everybody remember good old Harry Potter? Yeah, Harry is set up as a sympathetic character. Now, someone who has suffered undeserved misfortune, okay? Anybody like Clint Eastwood movies? Clint Eastwood always has some type of undeserved misfortune, okay? Given the average age in the room, some of you will remember the Billy Jack movies from the 1970s, early 1980s. Billy Jack was always undeserved misfortune. The guy just wants to go into town and get a bite to eat, gets in a fight with a biker gang, and that's the rest of the movie. So undeserved misfortune, something bad happens. Okay, a more common example from closer to our time is the movie First Blood and the book First Blood, where John Rambo is a Vietnam vet, and he's going around trying to visit his friends, and all he wants to do is cross that bridge and go to the diner over there for a bite to eat. And the local sheriff stops him, and then all hell breaks loose. Okay, so undeserved misfortune, something bad happens to the character that we immediately, again, sympathize with. Now, quirky or fun? So I've got Deadpool up there. Another common one I like to use when I did give this class is talking about the movie Liar, Liar with Jim Carrey. Okay, Jim Carrey, in that movie, if you're not familiar with it, plays a lawyer who is now compelled to always tell the truth. He's the butt of the joke. And everybody knows a lawyer joke or two, right? He is the butt of the joke. So we as the audience immediately recognize, oh, lawyer who has to tell the truth, this is going to be fun. And so we identify with him now in this position where he is awkwardly having to tell the truth. Now, how can we take those and go one step farther? So there's another thing that we talk about called kicking the dog. Okay? Now, we're not really going to kick dogs here, okay? But the idea is, I set up a character like this, and I make them sympathetic. I put them in a world or in a situation where we want to immediately pull them out. We want to see them grow. We want to see them change, get out of the environment that they're in. And then we just keep piling it on. Okay, so Harry Potter, right? Orphan. When we first meet Harry, where's he living? with his relatives, right? Is that a very positive relationship? No, it's a very bad relationship. And he has a little itty-bitty room under the stairs. We're kicking the dog. Yes, Harry starts as an orphan, immediately sympathetic, but we're making his situation worse. So we as the audience, after about 10 pages of this, are like, Harry, get the hell out of there. We want to see that happen. So being able to say, we're kicking the dog a little bit is going to help us be able to make that character just a little bit more sympathetic. Now, it says they are the center of the story and must stand out. This is critical. Okay, we talk a lot about exaggerated protagonists, and we always want to talk about folks like Jack Reacher or Alex Cross, who are very different than the people in the stories around them. If you think about some other stories, though, like we're going to talk about Star Wars here in a second, Luke Skywalker is not very remarkable, but the story still revolves around him. It revolves around his growth and his change over time. So how we make a character stand out is very critical. Now, without getting into what I covered the other day in one of my other classes, don't write the second banana. Okay, we all have written a character. Actually, raise your hand if you've done this. If you've written a side character that you really like, and you start gravitating your POV over to that side character, stop. That's not the right protagonist. Okay? Just flip that over if you need to. Make them the center of the story. Make them stand out. Now, finally, before we move on, this is not that difficult to do, okay, but it takes practice. And the more you go through the questions, the more you get familiar with these answers that we're going to talk about, you're going to be able to get this done. All right. Now, what are they trying to accomplish? The answer is a compelling goal. Okay, we want the protagonist to have a goal. In this particular case, I'm going to break down and talk about Luke Skywalker here in a second, but there's three main levels of goals. So we have a professional goal, or the public goal, or it's also called the physical goal. This is the biggest overarching goal in the story. This is the one thing that you can actually probably pick up from the back cover copy of the book. Flip it over and go, oh, they need to destroy the Death Star. Okay, got it. That's the big overarching goal. Now, just because it's obvious doesn't mean it's personal. So the personal goal, or the emotional goal, is something that means a lot to the hero themselves. What are they doing that they can actually, maybe even recruit some people to actually help them on board with their mission? Is there something that's going to be compelling for them to bring other folks into this? It's something that they can share with their friends. And finally, we have the private goal, the spiritual goal. This is very deeply personal. This is something that is often done in Hollywood productions. It's often done in a single scene with just the main character, the protagonist, and often a mentor character. And there's something that's said between the two of them, or it could be something that the protagonist says to themselves. It's deeply private, it's not revealed to anybody else but those closest to them. So let's talk about this as far as Luke Skywalker is concerned. Okay, so Luke Skywalker, I said his mission is to destroy the Death Star. At the beginning of the movie, does Luke Skywalker know about the Death Star? No. Who knows about the Death Star? We do. It's in the crawl, right? The music comes up, the words come up, and they go off into space, which is still like the coolest thing I ever saw when I was 6, right? But we learn about the Death Star in the crawl. So we, the audience, are what? Sucked in. What's this Death Star? What are they doing? This sounds really cool. This is obviously something of concern, but then I don't see the Death Star for quite some time. Luke has no concept of the Death Star. Truth be told, he has no concept of the Empire at all. When we meet Luke, what does he want to do? He wants to stop being a moisture farmer on Tatooine. He wants to go to the flight academy and join his buddies and become a pilot. Who runs the flight academy? The Empire. Luke has no clue of what's going on at the beginning of the movie. So we still set him up, though, to destroy the Death Star. His personal goal is when he discovers the hologram of Princess Leia in R2-D2. And he's immediately drawn to the idea that he needs to rescue her. Okay? Not very realistic, but he's a teenager, and I'm a father of a teenager, and they're not very realistic sometimes. Okay? Sorry, Gabby, if you're watching. Okay. But you get the idea. It becomes personal. He says, this woman is in danger, and we need to do something about this. He wants to rescue Princess Leia. And he uses this goal to compel others. He doesn't have to compel Obi-Wan, because Obi-Wan has his sense of duty, and the message is really for him. But who does he compel? Han Solo. Chewbacca, right? They hire them to be pilots, but over the course of the movie, They get to the Death Star and they find that Princess Leia's on board, and Han just wants to leave, right? He just wants to just get out of there and just leave the Empire behind. But Luke says, she's here, and who are you talking about? Well, it's the princess. She's in the detention block. And Han's still like, I don't want anything to do with this. And then what does Luke do? She's rich. Han needs money. And Han is immediately then compelled into this cockamamie scheme to go downstairs to the detention center and rescue the princess from the middle of the Imperial clutches, which we all know goes awesome, right? Nope. We'll talk about that later. Finally, his private goal. So right after Luke, he basically resists the call to adventure. He tells Obi-Wan he's not going to go with him. He returns home. He finds that his family has been murdered by the Empire. He comes back to Obi-Wan and says, I want to become a Jedi like my father. And it's shared just between the two of them. Even the droids aren't anywhere close. But it's that private goal of, this is what I want to do. Now, of the goals, does Luke Skywalker accomplish all three of these goals in the movie? No. He destroys the Death Star. He rescues Princess Leia. But he does not become a Jedi. He uses the Jedi magic, if you will. That's a whole nother class. He uses that magic. He becomes a magician, but he's not a Jedi. So he's familiar with it, but it's not something that he actually is a master at this point. So even though we have these as his goals, he doesn't necessarily need to accomplish these at the end of the story. Another classic example of this is the movie Casablanca. Okay? I could give you a class on Casablanca. If you've not watched this movie, please do so. Because Casablanca changed everything as far as cinema was concerned. In this time frame, around the World War II time frame, cinema had two purposes. Either one were the big epic movies that were like 4.5 hours. Imagine sitting on a wooden picnic bench for 4 hours without the cushy recliners and people that bring your beer to your seat and all that stuff. Or they were follies, 60 to 90-minute movies with no plot. I will admit to you, my two favorite movies of those are Sun Valley Serenade and Orchestra Wives, which are the Glenn Miller Band movies. Nothing happens in these movies. They just go play music. Hey, Bob, we lost our job. Let's go play some music. That's what they do. Okay? In this particular case, Casablanca changed all of that because it told an emotionally resonant story by utilizing goals. Okay? Rick does not get all of his goals in the end. Okay? He sacrifices the papers and gives those papers to Elsa and her husband to get them out of occupied territory. Spoiler, yeah, sorry. But if you haven't watched Casablanca, I highly recommend it. Next time you're scrolling through your cable and you see it on Turner Classic Movies, stop and watch it, okay? It might seem a little droll, a little slow, but from a character development perspective, it changed Hollywood. Like I said, that's a whole other class. All right, let's keep rolling. Who's with our hero? Secondary characters fill a lot of different roles. They're not just there. Once you bring in a cast of characters, everybody has a role. This is important to recognize because if you just bring them in as set dressing, you have shallow characters that the audience isn't going to care about. Your goal as a writer is not just to have your readers think about your protagonist and your antagonist and wanting to see that resolution of that conflict. You want them to see conflict and possibility in the entire cast of characters. Okay? I tell a story when I teach emotional resonance about killing off a side character that was so powerful my dad didn't talk to me for a week. Okay? This is where you want to be. The more you can introduce what other characters want and show what they're doing, it's going to do two things. It's going to provide additional sources of conflict, but it's also going to provide depth to your story because I bet all of you have a goal, right? Raise your hand if you got a goal. Yeah, everybody has a goal. Okay? And if we did a cast of characters movie or a story about all of us here in the room and everybody that's streaming, everybody has a goal. And those goals might be similar. They might be very disparate. They might actually intersperse conflict. That's where story is. Okay? That's where our story is. Now, you also have to treat them carefully. Again, we don't want to have that second banana thing, all right? I would imagine me being George Lucas writing the original Star Wars really wanting to gravitate towards Han Solo because he's just cool, right? Why am I stuck writing the whiny farm boy? Okay? If you've got your protagonist, you've gone through the time and effort to develop them, stick with them. If you start gravitating away, stop yourself, check yourself, and say, okay, I need to come back and do this differently. All right. Now, popular side character types. You have the protector and the deflector. This is what Jeff Schechter in My Story Can Beat Up Your Story calls the unity of opposites. So I have a protector who is trying to hold the hero's moral compass. I have the deflector who's trying to deflect them away from what they do. In the original Star Wars movie, Obi-Wan is the protector. He's the mentor character. The deflector, even though he doesn't come into contact with Luke, is Darth Vader. He's the one that talks about the power and the seduction of the dark side, right? He is obviously going to be the one that's going to try to deflect Luke on his internal moral compass of right and wrong. He's going to try to do that. You have a believer and you have a doubter. Okay? The believer, Star Wars, R2-D2. He has to be the most filthy-mouthed character ever because they beep out all of his lines. Yeah, I know, it's early. I had to tell the joke, though. Okay? But R2 will do anything to accomplish his mission. Remember, once Luke takes the restraining bolt off and they see the hologram, what does R2-D2 do? He runs off on this planet he's never been to before, likely, and trying to go find Obi-Wan Kenobi. He believes in the cause, whereas C-3PO is the doubter. What does C-3PO want to do? Nothing. C-3PO is always like, I just want to go, I want to walk over here and do nothing, and I don't want this war and all this conflict and all this other stuff. He's a protocol droid. He doesn't want to do anything like that. So you have the believer and the doubter. Then you have the thinker and the feeler. You have someone who approaches the problem, thinks it through, and is able to respond. That's Leia. They get Leia out of the detention block. They get trapped in the hallway. Who gets them out of there? She does. Okay? Han Solo is the feeler. He's the one that wants to shoot first, which he did. Okay? And then ask questions later. All right? So you see where we're going with this. So my side characters have different storylines, and they have different roles that I can make them play so that I'm actually helping the protagonist and, again, providing depth to the overall story. Now, bad guy. Okay? I gave a whole class on this yesterday. I'm going to cover the high points. If you want to go back and learn more about the antagonist, please look up the antagonist class from yesterday, because, again, that's a little bit more of a graduate level approach to how this works. But my villain, my antagonist, has to be powerful and committed. I have to show them in a position of power. They have something that no one else has. And they're committed to whatever they've decided to do. Whatever course of action they've chosen, they're committed to do this. So I've got my picture of Voldemort up there. Is he powerful? Yep. Is he committed? Yeah. He uses a lot of resources and a lot of different things to try to get to Harry Potter. Okay? So we see his power, we see his commitment as it goes. What's important here is that it's not necessarily that my antagonist needs to be the true antagonist. I can have a true antagonist well off screen. Okay? Think about the original Star Wars movie, we'll cover it in a second, but the antagonist for the overall Star Wars universe is Emperor Palpatine. Do we see him in the first movie? No. He's not in the first movie. He's off screen. He's referred to, and everybody sounds scared of him, but we don't see him. So the idea there is we have to have a villain that's close into that local area, which we do. All right, and I'll cover that in a second. And it's not Darth Vader. All right. Antagonists. Once you create those goals we talked about for your protagonist, they have to have goals too. Okay, the development of your antagonist, like I said yesterday in yesterday's class, is critical. As much time as you give to the creation of your protagonist, you have to give equal time to your antagonist. Go through the same exercises. Do the 5 questions from the antagonist perspective, because everybody knows the antagonist believes they're the hero of their own story, right? Go through the questions from their side. Flip things around a little bit. Ask them what they're trying to do and who's trying to do them. If you have these goals and you create them so that they're diametrically opposed or complete opposites to what the protagonist has, what are you doing? You're creating conflict, okay? Great characters are not enough to carry a story. Once you put those characters in direct conflict with each other, then you get to the point where you have emotional resonance and you tell a great story. This is what's important. So these goals really do affect how an antagonist and a protagonist relationship works. Let's talk about how that happens. Now, goals. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pause for a second and go back one because I want to actually break down something real quick. So I talk about creating obstacles. So in the creation of obstacles, the antagonist doesn't always have to be in the face of the protagonist saying, do this now, and then do this now. If you think about both the Harry Potter series and the Star Wars series, what we see a lot of that is world building. Through just the worlds that are created, the protagonist has to learn what's going on and learn how things are changing around them. Luke Skywalker, for example, once he and Obi-Wan leave the Obi-Wan's little house and they go to the Mos Eisley spaceport, things start to happen, and Luke starts to realize what he thinks about the overall universe is all wrong. Remember, he wants to go to the Imperial Flight Academy. He thinks they're the good guys. What happens when they first get to town? They're stopped by stormtroopers. They go to the bar. Luke almost gets killed at the bar. Obi-Wan has to step in and cut a guy's arm off with his lightsaber. Luke almost then screws up the entire negotiation with Han Solo because Luke's trying to be, the hero. Is he ready to be the hero? No. All of those things, though, that I've talked about as far as obstacles are just part of the world. We don't get the whole development of who the stormtroopers are. We just know that they're the soldiers of who? The bad guy. So as Luke is going and learning in this process, he's running into these different things that are challenging what he knows, and he's having to overcome these obstacles. The idea is, with these obstacles, and this gets into story structure a little bit, sorry, Pantsers, just hang on for like 30 seconds, I promise I'll be done. The idea is, once you're doing this, you're having what we call tri-fail cycles. And the character is learning and failing, but they're learning a little bit more, and they're gaining a little bit of power as they go. So that as they progress through the story, at the critical point where you need them to, they have learned all the skills, they've learned all the things that they need to know to be able to stop reacting to the world around them and actually take action. In Star Wars, this happens when they get to these little security shack, when Luke finds out that Princess Leia is there, because Luke at this point, he's kind of lost his innocence a little bit. He's grown from being the whiny farm boy to the point when he finds Princess Leia, he convinces Han and Chewbacca to go after him. Whose idea is it to put the handcuffs on Chewie and fake like they're taking him as a prisoner? It's Luke. Would we have expected Luke to do that when we first met him as a whiny farm boy who wanted to get the power converters to Tashi Station? No. So that growth is important, and it happened because of those obstacles. Now, back to goals. So when we look at our goals of our antagonist, notice I told you that the antagonist for Star Wars is not Darth Vader. Darth Vader's a goon. That's all he is in the first movie. Okay? He's just a representation of the force of the bad guy. That was a really bad pun. He's a representation of what the bad guy can do. All right. So in this case, the antagonist for Star Wars is Grand Moff Tarkin, played by Peter Cushing. So we talked about Luke's goals. Take a look at Tarkin's. So Luke wants to destroy the Death Star. Tarkin wants to what? Use it. He wants to use it to pacify the galaxy. All right. Luke wants to rescue Princess Leia. What does Tarkin do? He schedules her for execution. He's done with her. Okay, powerful and committed. Finally, Luke wants to become a Jedi. What does Tarkin say? Destroy the rebellion and the Jedi once and for all. What's cool about this, and the reason why I like to bring this up, is because we talk about the private goal of Luke. He shares that with Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? And there's nobody around. Tarkin says this only to Darth Vader. No one else is around. So it's the same thing as what Luke has done, but from the antagonist perspective. So we've seen all the things that need to happen, even down to the point that that is privately shared between Tarkin and Darth Vader, just one other character, which is pretty cool. All right, does anybody have any questions on goals? All right, awesome. Oh, hit the microphone, hit the microphone.
When you mentioned Luke putting the cuffs on, that's using story to show the development. And I guess we could plot those in beats, kind of time it out right.
Absolutely, you certainly could, but pantsers, don't worry about beats. It's okay, I promise. I'm not making fun of you. I do a lot of pantsing too, but I've found in my own experience that plotting really works, and I like to plot from the character perspective, which is a different thing. All right, so is everybody ready for question number 5? Okay. This is the most difficult question. It's the most complicated answer. Everybody ready? If you haven't figured out yet, I like to joke around a lot. Every story comes down to life or death, period. These are your stakes. Everything is life or death. But Kevin, you just talked about that movie Liar Liar with Jim Carrey, which is a comedy. Nobody's going to die in that movie. You're right. Nobody's going to literally die in that movie. But the relationship that he has with his son, because he cannot tell the truth, is going to die. It's not a literal death, it's a figurative death. But every story comes down to the all or nothing consequence. I would imagine, as you think about what you do, and this is genre agnostic too, everybody, everything comes down to life or death. Okay? All or nothing. Don't be afraid of this ending. Okay? Once you understand how this works, you'll find that this kind of stuff is really, really exhilarating for you as a writer, and it's liberating because I get to have my characters fail. If I'm writing a character named Leo, and I'm writing Leo and he's perfect and nothing ever happens, do you buy it? No. And we don't like those stories. Or we like them for all the wrong reasons. James Bond, anybody? James Bond always wins. We, the audience, like to see how he wins. All right? A little bit different there, but we like to see our characters make mistakes. We want to see them as human beings. Okay? Even though they're just people that exist in our heads that we tell people about, and we make money off of this. Okay? We want our readers to care about them. We want our readers to have that connection. We want them to feel what our characters feel. And so if our characters fail, has everybody failed at something here before? Yeah. If we have a character that never fails, we don't connect. This is the book you throw across the room. Anybody ever walk out of a movie theater? There you go. Same thing. This is the important connection. Don't be afraid of the all or nothing ending because it really does work well in your favor. So to recap, these are our 5 critical questions. And then we're going to cover the relationship character quickly, and then I'll have some time for questions at the end. So again, who is my hero? What are they trying to accomplish? Who's with them on the journey? Who is now trying to stop them? And again, what happens if you fail? And again, the hero fails, it's all or nothing. All right. I see a question. If you'll hit the microphone, that'd be great.
So one of the challenges I have with these is I don't write action or fantasy, so it's more women's fiction, romance, and the goals and things like that, it's awesome. But there's a point where I'm like, how do I apply this when, for example, there's no antagonist, there's nobody trying to stop them. So I was wondering if you can kind of relate that to some of these other genres.
So I firmly believe that this is genre agnostic. I believe that you can do this with every genre, whether it's thrillers, whether it's women's fiction, suspense, action, adventure. You're always going to have something that's going to be standing in the way of the protagonist. And whether that is an actual character or a natural force or something along those lines, something is always in the way. So I think you're always going to have some type of an antagonist. Even if that antagonist is crippling self-doubt or anxiety, you have an antagonist. So how the protagonist fights through that conflict with the antagonist and gets to a resolution where they've overcome them, that's a powerful story. So I think in every genre, you're going to have some type of an antagonist, whether, again, it's physical or mental or emotional, it's there. And the more you can pull that out of your characters and the more you can develop that, it's going to create your conflict. So I firmly believe this is genre agnostic. Okay, relationship character. Okay, so again, we call this relationship or dynamic or stakes characters, right? So they are on the journey with our protagonist. Okay, the reason why we call them a relationship character. We see them relating to our character throughout all the different things that they're doing in the course of the story. Now, this is important to talk about with Princess Leia because with Leia, we see her faults versus Luke Skywalker. Because we learn later on that they're twins, right? Spoiler alert, sorry. Okay, but we learn later on that they're twins. And if you think about it from this perspective, Luke Skywalker, we meet him, whiny farm boy, clueless about things that are going on in the galaxy and all this other stuff, and he just wants to escape Tatooine like most of us ever wanted to get away from home. What about Leia at this point in time? She's a senator. She's a senator. She's already leading her people. She's a leader of the rebellion. We see her as this extremely competent person versus Luke Skywalker, who's the whiny farm boy. So through Leia, we see Luke's faults. And then we see that Luke, in order to get to where Leia is, Luke has to change, which is extremely important. Now, providing wisdom and insight to the antagonist, or to the protagonist. Now, this is something where, if you think about it, with my picture of Leia up there, Leia doesn't really necessarily do this till close to the end. But who does? Han Solo. Han Solo is a little bit of a relationship character too, because Han actually gives the entire theme of the entire series of Star Wars as what we call an inverse theme, because he's a kind of a sarcastic guy. I'll cover that in just a second and show you what it was, because Han actually plays a relationship too, because Han changes over time, right? Han is the one that wants to take the money and run. He gets the money. What does he do? He comes back to save Luke. Okay? So Han changes over time. Now, talking about theme, let me go on and move to the next slide. Okay, your stakes characters and themes, oftentimes you'll see this done through dialogue. I talked about Casablanca a little while ago. The police chief, Henri, says to Rick, "You always were a patriot," and Rick says, "I just take care of myself." That's what Rick believes the theme of the story to be, but what does Rick do? He takes care of other people, okay? Now, in this particular case with Star Wars, Han gives us the inverse theme. It's that scene when they're on the Millennium Falcon and they're speeding off to Alderaan. And he says, basically, what is it? Ancient weapons and hokey religions are no match for a good blaster, kid. Flip that around. How does Luke destroy the Death Star? By using the Force, right? We get 2 more movies that talk about Luke becoming a Jedi Knight. So the rise of the ancient weapon and hokey religion, if you will, versus the good blaster. So Han gives us the theme. But it's turned around again because Han's a little bit sarcastic, so it's done in the inverse way. All right. So, character growth. How do you make this work? Okay, we talked about the importance of try-fail cycles. If Luke Skywalker is going from the beginning of the movie down to the end where he's the hero of the Rebel Alliance, and he does not change, if he's still the whiny farm boy when he gets down there to climb into the X-Wing fighter, do any of us believe it? No. This is important because Luke is moving in what we call an archetypal story structure. He's moving from being an orphan that's clueless about things, he's wandering, he's gathering skills, he gets past his midpoint, he stops reacting to the world around him and starts acting against it. He becomes a warrior. But does Luke fail in the warrior phase? Yeah, he does. They're chased around the Death Star and all kinds of bad things happen, but then he gets to the end and he becomes the martyr because he recognizes he has to get into that X-Wing fighter, which he's never flown, by the way. He has to get into this X-Wing fighter and go off on this crazy suicide mission against that big Death Star thing to do what? To save Leia. Okay, because she's not completely done. She's not saved. But what's interesting is, over the character growth phase, when we first meet Leia, right, we see her as the victim character. She's clearly portrayed as the victim. And then all through her incarceration on the Death Star, she's the victim, she's the victim. But then once they get into that hallway and they're pinned down by blaster fire, she's the one that gets them out of it, isn't she? She takes the blaster, blasts the grate, they go down into the garbage chute, which doesn't go well, but she got them out of the situation. And we see Leia now in a very different light because we've seen her as the victim this entire time, but because of that interaction on the Death Star and what she does, when we get to the end, and Luke and his buddies are down there flying against the Death Star, where's Leia? She's in the command center with the generals and the admirals and all the people in charge, and we believe she's supposed to be there because of what we've seen. We've seen her grow over time. I talked about Han's growth. Han, again, take the money and run, he's the one that comes back and gets Luke. So this is important to understand that character growth, we have to do this. We have to have those clear and compelling goals. If the characters don't have a goal, even if it's just a side character with one goal in mind like C-3PO, stay out of everything, you're missing an important beat, missing a point. They must know the stakes. Okay, Luke Skywalker, we talked about him being clueless. When they get to Alderaan and Alderaan is no longer there, he's seen Obi-Wan's reaction of a million voices crying out and then suddenly silenced, right? Luke is smart enough at that point to say, something happened to Alderaan. That thing over there, that moon or space station or whatever we think it is, was responsible for this. Luke now knows the stakes. And he knows the stakes are a little bit larger than Leia. Leia, of course, knows the stakes because she is clued in on this from the very beginning, being a senator and whatnot. She understands what's going on. As Luke changes, though, and knows the stakes, who else knows the stakes? Everybody. That's why the story is emotionally powerful for us. That's why we were all drawn in and spent thousands of dollars on toys. Sorry, Mom and Dad. Okay, it's the way it works. We're pulled into this because we see these changes. We see them what they want and what they think they want versus what they really get in the end. All right? Like I talked about before, don't be afraid of the all or nothing ending. Okay? Understanding that it is completely possible for you to get to the end of the story and your characters not get something that they want is critical because how many times do you go through something and you don't get what you want? We're human beings. That's what happens. We end up changing those goals and we continue to move. We continue to move forward. Okay, we're writers. We experience writing and rejection all the time. Anybody been rejected before? Yep, everybody raise your hands. And if those of you that haven't, you'll get your merit badge soon. Okay? When I first started writing, again, I was told I was a good writer, and I had that idea for the character. I was on a college campus. I went back and took a class. Took creative writing, which I'd had in college because I was an English minor. And I took creative writing, and I turned this first assignment, and it comes back on with 2 words on it. See me. This is either really good or really bad. And the teacher says, why aren't you published? I had no idea. I couldn't answer it. And so while I'm auditing this class, she tells me, you're going to write 3 short stories this semester. And as soon as you get them written and get them edited, and I'll help you with this, you're going to send these out for publication. And I said, why? And she said, because you need to earn your rejection merit badge. You need to earn this because it's something that everybody's going to experience at one point in time, and you need to be ready for it, because just because one person turns it down doesn't mean that the next person or 55 down the line aren't going to buy it. Okay? And she was right. Don't write in a vacuum. If you don't have a beta reader or an alpha reader or someone that's helping you along the way, find one. Okay, because all the things we talked about here are much easier to discuss if someone else is reading your writing and saying, hey, you know what, you're not doing this. Let's work on this together. Okay, we have about 3.5 minutes for questions. So if you have a question, they do have microphones up here. I know at least somebody has a question. I haven't completely blown your minds this morning. Awesome, I have a taker.
Thank you very much for being here. When you say protector, deflector, believer, doubter, thinker, feeler, do you attach those to your antagonists, your protagonists, or like where did that realm of characters fit in?
Those are all side characters. So
Okay.
every time we talk about those different roles, those are side characters. Your protagonist and your antagonist, that's their role. They are person versus person against each other.
These are their sidekicks?
Sidekicks. And what you'll notice is that your sidekicks on both sides, your protagonist and antagonist, they will have those different things too. You might have an antagonist that has a believer and a doubter and a thinker and a feeler attached with them depending upon how big your cast of characters is.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Hi.
Hi.
You talked about how the protagonist and antagonist should sort of have flip goals of each other.
Absolutely.
How much should the side characters' goals tie in with the protagonist goals?
That's a great question. What you can do with that, especially if you've got a very large cast of characters, if you've got a cast of characters there where you've got a thinker on one side that has a goal, having someone on the opposite side, on the antagonist cast, that has a different goal and conflict with them, that's awesome. Because again, it's deeper conflict. It gives you an opportunity to broaden out your story a little bit further.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Let's go back over here.
You made a comment a moment ago about no one likes a perfect character. How do you explain the Jack Reacher character?
I don't think Jack Reacher's perfect. I think Jack Reacher changes over time. I think what ends up happening is, when we first meet him, and granted, I am not very deep into the books, I'll admit this, but I think over time you see his reactions and his relationships with other people deepen because he's changing over time. So I firmly believe he's moving forward. I'm going to go over here. About 2 minutes, guys.
I had another question about the protector, deflector, believer, the side characters. Is it reasonable to expect there are circumstances where you would have overlap between those archetypes?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep.
So what you've been covering is one protagonist, but if you have like a buddy cop kind of thing, how does that change? And so some of those traits, the believer, can those go into the other POVs?
Absolutely. If you have multiple protagonists, right, and you have one antagonist, the goals of my multiple protagonists are still in opposition to the antagonist. And they're two different characters, and they see those goals differently. That provides the dynamic that you're asking for in that buddy cop phase. So we can talk more about that later if you'd like. I got about a minute left. Let's go very quickly here and then back.
You talked about the all or nothing. In romance, happily ever after is guaranteed. So can you give an example of what a nothing would look like in romance?
Nothing at that point is the concept of the reader thinking that everything is lost. At some point in romance, there's going to be that moment where...
The dark moment.
The dark moment, yeah. So it's that anticipation of the reader. If you can keep them on the string, if you will, to that point, then you've got your all or nothing. It's the expectation of the reader. Okay? Very quickly, I got 20 seconds.
All right. So what about a case where there are protagonists that are antagonizing each other, and so the story follows between 2 points of view, like, for example, the book Scythe?
Right. So again, you've got a protagonist and an antagonist that are doing it to each other. That's their conflict as they move forward, so it's all doing the same thing.
Okay.
All right, so we are out of time, everybody. Thank you for joining me this morning. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day at 20 Books.